The seal was gone before she opened her eyes. Mira knew it the way a physician knows a pulse has changed, not from sight, not yet, but from the particular quality of the silence outside her door, the kind of silence that collects when servants have been told not to knock. She lay still another moment, her hands flat on the coverlet, counting her own breathing the way she had learned to count it when she was 9 years old, and her father's creditors had come to stand in the hall below and speak of everything they intended to take. Then she rose, dressed herself, and went to the writing table. The compartment in the lower drawer, the one with the false back she had lined herself with green felt, was open. Not forced, opened with a key. The ivory seal bearing the crest of the Duchy of Aristocratic, which had been placed in her hands at the marriage ceremony 3 years ago by the Duke's own grandmother, and which she had used since on every household document, every letter of charity, every instruction to the steward, it was gone. In its place, as if in answer to a question she had not yet had the chance to ask, was a folded note in the hand of Mrs. Delvain, the housekeeper, informing her that the East Suite had been prepared for a guest, and that Her Grace's belongings were to be moved to the upper corridor rooms at Her Grace's earliest convenience. She did not read it twice. She set it down, corner to corner with the edge of the table, and stood for a moment looking at the window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle. It was the first week of July, and the heat had already been pressing like a flattened hand for a fortnight, and in it she could see the dust disturbed by whoever had opened the drawer in the night. She noted this. She noted also that her wardrobes, when she turned to check, held only what she had brought to this house, her own plain things. Inherited and remade, none of the dresses the Duke had commissioned in the first year. Those, she supposed, had been quietly reassigned. She would remember this morning a long time afterward, not because of the insult. She had been cataloging insults since before she knew the word, but because of what she noticed, standing in that particulate light with the empty compartment behind her. She noticed that she was not surprised, and she did not know yet whether that said something terrible about the Duke, or only something true about herself. Mira Caledon had come to Aristocratic 3 years ago as the second daughter of a house that was a name more than it was money, carrying a modest portion and an immodest reputation for knowing more than was comfortable about other people's arrangements. The match had been described to her, with some delicacy, as a practical one, and she had accepted it in that spirit. The Duke of Aristocratic, Edvard, though she had called him that perhaps 4 times, was 36 to her 26, recently returned from 2 years abroad following the death of his first wife, possessed of estates that required an administrator as much as a duchess, and encased in a reserve so complete that she had once watched him receive the news of a broken axle in a February storm and respond with the adjustment of one cuff. She had respected this. She had, over time, found in it something she cautiously recognized as her own territory. What she had not understood, in the beginning, was Lord Caspian Hale. The Duke's cousin had been at Aristocratic before she arrived, and had never properly left. A beautiful man, dark and immaculate, with a voice that descended to kindness as water descends to the lowest point available. He managed the estate correspondence in the Duke's absences, knew the tenants by name, knew which magistrates were which, and smiled at Mira with the pleasantest expression she had ever distrusted on sight. He called her cousin. He brought her small attentions, a book he thought she'd like, a posy from the kitchen garden, and when she thanked him, he deflected with such practiced grace that she was left each time uncertain whether the gift had been kindness or performance. She had filed him under the heading of unknowable and proceeded with her work, which was considerable. The Aristocratic household accounts had been kept in what she could only describe as a state of creative generosity toward whoever was doing the keeping, and it had taken her the better part of the first year to reconstruct them into something that corresponded to observable reality. The steward, an elderly man named Pruitt, with honest eyes and no instinct for numbers, had wept with what she took to be relief when she showed him the corrected ledgers. She had told no one else what she had found in the process of correcting them. There were figures she had copied into a small book she kept separate, and she had not yet decided what to do with them. She had meant to decide by Michaelmas. Michaelmas was now 11 weeks away. She put on her plainest dress, the gray one she thought of as her working garb, and went downstairs to find something to eat before anyone could find her first. She was not quick enough. Mrs. Delvane was waiting at the foot of the stairs with the expression of a woman carrying out orders she has been told are not her fault. "Your Grace," she began. "About the rooms. I received your note." Mira moved past her toward the breakfast room. "Is there coffee?" "Yes, Your Grace. But Lord Hale asked that I confirm the timing." "The guest arrives Friday." She stopped. "What guest?" The housekeeper's face did something involuntary. "I was given to understand, a Miss Verity Alcott." And her companion. The name meant nothing yet. The Friday meant 3 days. She turned it over once, set it aside, and continued walking. "Then we have 3 days. I'll need the linen inventory for the East Suite before noon." "Your Grace," Mrs. Delvane's voice dropped. His Grace's instructions were given through Lord Hale. His Grace himself, she stopped, is not presently at Arundholm. Mira poured her own coffee. "I know. I've been the one writing his letters for a fortnight." She looked up. "I am not angry with you, Mrs. Delvane. Get me the linen inventory." The housekeeper went. Mira stood with her coffee and looked at the window and thought. Friday. The question she did not ask aloud, the one she carried back upstairs with her and set on the writing table beside the note, was this: who had given Lord Hale the key to her seal? Tobias Pruitt found her in the estate room at 9:30, where she had spread the linen inventory across one table and the household accounts across the other, and was cross-referencing them with the expression he called, privately, her reckoning face. He was 71 years old and had served 3 generations of the duchy, and he knocked on the doorframe as though it might bite him. "Mr. Pruitt," she said without looking up. "Come in." "Shut the door." He came in. He shut the door. He looked at the accounts and then at her. "You've heard then. I have been comprehensively informed." She turned a page. "Sit down, please. My neck aches from looking up." He sat, with the stiffness of old joints and some other stiffness that was not physical. "I didn't know about the seal, Your Grace. I want you to know that. I would have woken you. I believe you." She looked up then, briefly, who gave Lord Hale the key. Pruitt's hands, large, honest, red at the knuckles, settled on his thighs. "He has a master key, has had it since before you came. His Grace never rescinded it." He paused. "He used it once before, that I know of, last November, when His Grace was in the city. There were letters in your writing room," he said, "that he needed for correspondence." She kept her face still. She thought about November. In November, she had been corresponding with the solicitors in Hartwell about a trust matter, and she had left the replies, unread yet, bundled with a ribbon, on her writing table for 2 days while she dealt with a fever among the kitchen staff. When she had returned to them, she had thought one bundle slightly disordered. She had thought she had done it herself. "How long," she said, "has Lord Hale been managing the Duke's correspondence when the Duke is absent?" 18 months. Pruitt's voice went very quiet, since Her Grace, the first Duchess, died. Mira put down her pen. She looked at her hands, at the slight ink stain on the 3rd finger of her right hand that never quite came clean, and she thought with great deliberateness about what she knew, and what she could demonstrate, and the distance between those things. "Mr. Pruitt," she said, "I need you to locate something for me. The receiving ledger for the Eastern tenancies, Michaelmas quarter of the year before I arrived. Don't ask Lord Hale where it is. Don't tell anyone you're looking." Pruitt's chin came up an inch. In 30 years of watching men's faces, she had learned that this particular movement, in a person of his character, was the motion of someone deciding to be brave. "I know where it is," he said. She looked at him. "I put it somewhere," he said, "where I thought it would be harder to find." "Then it should be." He cleared his throat. In case someone came, eventually, who would know what to do with it. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, one of the estate's red kites made a lazy circle above the south field, tilting on the heat. "How long have you been waiting?" 2 years, said Pruitt, give or take. She nodded once, slowly, then bring it to me. And not a word. He went. She returned to the linen inventory and the accounts and the small separate book she had transferred from her writing table to her left pocket that morning, and she stayed very still inside the gathering shape of what she was beginning to understand, the way a person stays still in a room where the ceiling is working out whether it intends to hold. Lord Hale came to find her at noon, as she had known he would. He appeared in the doorway of the estate room, with his coat exactly right and his expression arranged to be kind. Mira, he always used her given name. She had let it go. "I hope Mrs. Delvane explained. I'm sorry you had to hear it that way. It was rather clumsy." Was it? She did not look up. "I thought it was quite efficient, actually. The note was very clear. You must be. I can imagine how this looks." He came into the room, unhurried, and set one hand on the back of the chair across from her. This is a private matter. He didn't want a formal communication. He asked me to manage the arrangements. Now she looked up. "He asked you. He trusts me with such things." The expression did not waver. "You know that. I know he trusts you," she said. "Yes." She looked back at her papers. "Who is Miss Alcott?" A fraction of a pause, less than a heartbeat. "A friend of long standing." She and Edvard, before his first marriage, there was an understanding. It was set aside for reasons. She has been abroad. She has returned. He said it gently, as if the gentleness were the mercy and not the cruelty. "I am sorry, Mira, truly, but you knew this was a practical arrangement. Edvard was very honest with you." "He was," she said. "He won't set you aside publicly, your position here, the arrangements that were agreed. None of that changes." She set down her pen with great care. She squared the inventory, corner to corner. "And the seal." Another pause. Fractionally longer. "The seal is a household instrument. While matters are as they are, it seemed sensible for it to be held centrally." He smiled. The smile reached his eyes, which she had always found more alarming than if it had not. "You understand." "Perfectly," she said. He took her understanding as the close of the matter, which she had intended. He said something additionally kind and left, and she listened to his footsteps go down the corridor and around the corner and become inaudible, and then she opened the small separate book and turned to the page she had been considering since morning, and read the figures there again the way one reads something one has already memorized, for the comfort of finding it unchanged. At 2:30, Pruitt came back with the ledger. She did not sleep well the 2 nights before Miss Alcott arrived. This was not distress, or not entirely. She was honest with herself about the small, precise pain of the thing, the way one is honest about a splinter before setting it aside to deal with later. but rather the quality of wakefulness that attends the understanding that one is inside a situation requiring one to move correctly, and that moving correctly will require preparation of a kind that cannot be rushed. She used the nights to read. She had the Eastern Tenancy Ledger and her own accounts, and the bundle of correspondence she had not yet untied from November, which she untied now, and the household order books going back 18 months. She read them all. She made notes in a hand so small it was very nearly cipher. On the morning of Friday, she rose early, washed her face, and went down to the kitchen garden, where the kitchen boy's dog, a brown spaniel of no discernible breeding and very decided opinions, came to lean against her leg in the particular canine mode that is not affection, but is not nothing. She stood there a while in the early light, with his weight against her knee and the scent of the sweet peas on the warm air, and she had a thought she did not pursue very far, that she would miss this specific morning light if she had to leave, the way it came through the kitchen garden wall with that long July angle, making gold things of the bean poles. Then she heard wheels on the gravel and went inside. She was in the estate room when Miss Verity Alcott was shown in to pay a courtesy call, which was, she would consider this afterward, something Lord Hale had not anticipated, and which told her something. Miss Alcott was perhaps 30, fair, with a quality of stillness that Mira had observed before in people who have lived for a long time on the management of their own effects. She wore pale blue, and she wore it with the confidence of a woman who has been told she looks well in it so often that she now simply knows it. Her hands were folded. She looked at the crowded tables of Mira's estate room and said, "You must be very busy," with an inflection Mira could not quite parse. "There's always something," Mira said. "Please sit down." Miss Alcott sat. Her companion, a silent gray-haired woman, positioned herself near the door. Between the two women at the table was the polite and particular silence of people performing the inspection of each other's defenses. "Lord Hale tells me you have managed the household very ably," Miss Alcott said. 3 years is a long time to keep things running. The household has capable people in it. Mira's voice was even. "Mr. Pruitt has been the real steady hand." "Yes," Miss Alcott looked at her hands, then up. Her eyes were a very clear gray, and whatever was in them was not. Mira thought, "Triumph, I hope this has not been. I wanted to call on you myself rather than, I did not choose the circumstances, Your Grace." "No," said Mira, "I don't believe you did." Something shifted in the gray eyes. Mira noted it and did not note it aloud. She offered tea. Miss Alcott accepted it. They spoke for 20 minutes about the house and the gardens and the red kites, which turned out to be a subject Miss Alcott had unexpected opinions about, having spent time abroad in a country where a related species was considered lucky. By the time she stood to go, she was looking at Mira with an expression that had an apology somewhere in it that had not yet found its words. At the door she said, "He hasn't told me everything, I think, about why things are as they are." "No," said Mira. "I don't imagine Lord Hale tells anyone everything." Miss Alcott went very still. Her hand on the doorframe tightened for just a moment, the way a woman's hand tightens when she realizes something has been framed wrong from the beginning. She looked at Mira for a long breath. Then she left. Mira stayed where she was and thought, there is a second person in this house who does not know what she has been brought into. She thought, that changes the count. The Duke arrived on a Tuesday. She knew he was coming 4 days before because Pruitt told her, not because Lord Hale had announced it to the household, which he had not, but because the head groom had quietly asked Pruitt whether the Duke's preferred horse should be prepared, and Pruitt had quietly asked the head groom when, and the head groom had said Saturday. So Mira had from Saturday to Tuesday to complete her reconstruction of the ledgers and draft what she needed to draft and identify who would need to be in the room when the time came. Because she had decided, with the finality of someone who has been deciding the same thing in different forms for some weeks, that she would not be explaining this to the Duke in private. Not because she distrusted the Duke, or not primarily, but because private explanations of financial fraud by a wife to a husband are, historically, easy to characterize as other things. She needed witnesses. She needed the right witnesses. She had begun assembling them. Pruitt would stand. She did not have to ask. He had found her the ledger. He had been waiting 2 years. Miss Alcott? This had required more thought. But the gray eyes, and the tightened hand, and the particular quality of a woman who has been kept in the position of unwilling instrument, Mira had sent a note, oblique and brief, and received in return a note more oblique still, and concluded that Miss Alcott would come if asked, and would not be managed in any direction she hadn't already chosen for herself. She needed one more. The magistrate for the district, a Judge Aldrin, a man of severe habits and a reputation for thoroughness she had verified through the tenants' gossip, had an open day on Thursdays. She wrote to him on a Thursday, on household stationery, using terms precise enough to communicate gravity and imprecise enough not to require explanation she wasn't ready to give. He replied within a day he would come. He would bring no one but his clerk. He asked only that she be certain. She read his reply twice. She thought about certainty. She thought about what the figures showed, and what the ledgers showed, and what the November correspondence showed, the order to the apothecary in Hartwell, made on a state account and in the Duke's name for the 18 months before the first Duchess died. The quantities, patient-coded rather than named, the invoice matched against the household receipt that listed not a name but a room number. The master suite's dressing room, which had been the first Duchess's domain, and beneath it in Lord Hale's hand, a delivery note she did not think he had meant to leave in the household books, a note that said only the compound is adjusted per your last, and bore a date 3 days before the first Duchess had her last, sudden, much-mourned decline. She thought about certainty for a long time. Then she put the documents in order and tied them with red ribbon, the way documents to be presented in a legal proceeding are tied, and set them in the estate room cabinet, and locked it, and kept the key. She was not afraid exactly. She was the way a road is, she thought, existing for the purpose of the thing coming down it. The Duke arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a state of dusty travel and what she read, from across the entrance hall, as a coiled tiredness that had been living in his shoulders too long. He was taller than she remembered, or she had forgotten, which came to the same thing. He had his horse's travel in him, that particular upright looseness of a man who has ridden a long way and held himself correctly the whole distance, and when he saw her standing in the entrance hall he stopped walking, and the look that crossed his face was not the one she had been braced for. It was complicated. That was the word she would have used in her notes, if she had been noting faces. Complicated. "Your Grace," she said. Because there were staff present. Mrs. Caledon, because there always had been, in front of staff. He did not go to Miss Alcott's rooms that night. She knew this because the upper corridor rooms she had been moved to shared a wall with nothing relevant but had a view of the East Suite's windows, and the East Suite's windows remained dark. And it was possible she checked this more than once. She noted that she checked it. She did not draw conclusions. She was very good at not drawing conclusions, which was a skill that had cost her rather a lot to develop, and that she intended to recoup at some point. On Wednesday morning, he found her in the estate room. She had not arranged for this, and had not staged it, and was, when he appeared in the doorway, in the middle of calculating feed costs for the autumn against the projected grain yield, which was the kind of work she found genuinely absorbing, and which was therefore the context in which her face was at its most unrehearsed. She looked up, and he looked at her, and the feed costs became temporarily less interesting. "May I come in?" he said, which was, she did not show that this surprised her, not what she had expected him to say. "It's your house," she said. And then, "Yes, please," he came in. He looked at the tables. He was quiet for a moment in the way that was not discomfort but was something she had never quite named, a kind of quality of attention that settled on whatever he looked at. He picked up nothing. He read nothing. He only looked. "How long," he said, "have you been keeping the accounts yourself?" "Since the 2nd month," she said. Another pause. "You found errors." "I found what I think you should see." She kept her voice level. "Not now, and not privately. I have asked Judge Aldrin to come on Thursday. I need you to be there. And Mr. Pruitt, and," she considered for a very small moment, "and Miss Alcott, if she will come. She deserves to know what she has been placed in the middle of." The Duke looked at her for so long that she had time to notice the gray at his temples, which was new since, she calculated, the autumn before last, and to notice also that his hands were resting at his sides in a stillness that she recognized because she had spent 3 years reading this man across rooms as the stillness of someone absorbing something they have been half expecting. "Caspian," he said. It was not a question. She said nothing. He looked at the window. The red kite was there again, or another one. She had begun to think of it as the same bird, making its tilt and wheel above the south field. He watched it for a moment. "Then, how long have you known?" "I began to think I knew in February," she said. "I became certain in June." "And you said nothing." "Not accusation. The opposite. I needed it to be demonstrable," she said. "Private certainty is not a thing courts of law accept, and I was not going to bring this to you as a feeling." He turned back from the window. He looked at her face with a directness she had not often had from him, not head-on like this, and she kept her own face at its most neutral, which was an exercise that was, she noted for her own private accounts, somewhat more effortful than usual. "You should have been told," he said, "when I arranged this marriage, what Caspian's position in the estate was. What access he had, I thought." He stopped. Began again. "Differently, I thought his loyalty was to the house." "It was," she said. His own definition of the house. Something passed across his face, one brief collapse of composure, there and gone, like a door opened and shut. He closed it with the slight adjustment of a cuff that she remembered from 3 years ago, and that she now understood was the outer sign of an inward discipline that had been installed too early and kept too long. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she said. "At 10. He turned to go, and she turned back to her feed costs, and the question she did not put into the air, the one about why Miss Alcott was here, and whose idea it had been, and what had been said to persuade a woman of Miss Alcott's obvious discernment to come in the role she had apparently been handed. That question she put in a specific compartment and shut it, gently, for later. She nearly opened it that evening, when she met him by accident in the long gallery as she was carrying the household candle to light her way upstairs, and he was coming in the opposite direction with the same general air of a man who has been in a room by himself for several hours and has decided to stop. They both stopped walking. The single candle put a small warm circle around both of them that had nothing at all to do with anything. He said, "I have been in the East Suite library." He said it as if she had asked. "Is that where you've been?" she said. Caspian suggested, "It was represented to me that you and I were, that things had become formal, that you preferred the arrangement." she thought of November, of her letters read and resorted, and probably, she thought of this now with cold precision, answered in her name, or enough of her communications shaped, enough of his shaped in return, that a silence between them had been quietly constructed to look like a preference. Like mutual indifference. Like a practical arrangement fully ripened into its practical conclusion. He has managed our correspondence, she said, rather too thoroughly. The Duke's expression did something that was not quite a wince and not quite anger, so it seems, a pause. Mira, it was the 4th time he had used her given name. She had been counting. She could not pretend otherwise. Edvard, she said. I want to tell you something I cannot yet. I mean that I cannot set it before you properly. Not until tomorrow, and not until there are witnesses, because I will not ask you to take it on faith. He looked at her with that same direct head on attention from the estate room, and in the candlelight she could see that his face was doing something it very rarely did. It was entirely at rest, all the armoring gone, showing whatever was behind it. But there is something you do not know yet about what I intended when I brought you here. Something Caspian did not intend you ever to know. She was quiet for a long breath. Then, I will hear it, she said. Before witnesses, tomorrow, at 10. Yes, he looked at her. I know you will do this correctly. I know you. He stopped. He had a habit, she had noticed before, of stopping at the most important part of a sentence, not because he ran out of words, but because he was deciding whether the words were entitled to the moment. He looked at the flame of the candle she was holding, and his face did something quiet and private that she did not name. Sleep well, he said. She climbed the stairs. She lay in the upper corridor room in the dark and thought, tomorrow. She thought, witnesses. She thought, last, about the way his face had looked without its armor, which was a thought she put in the compartment with the other one and shut rather more firmly. She did not sleep until the birds started. Judge Aldrin arrived at 9:30 with his clerk, a young man who wore very new shoes and held a ledger book and was plainly there to write things down. Mira received them in the drawing room and gave them coffee and spoke of the heat, and the judge, a long dry man with a magisterial nose, looked at the documents she had arranged on the side table, tied with their red ribbon, and said only, "You know what you have here." "I know what I believe I have," she said. "The demonstration will tell us both." Pruitt came at 5 to 10. He stood near the window. He was not a sitting-down man, in her experience, when he was about something serious, and he had brought with him the Michaelmas ledger from the year before she came, which he set on the table beside her documents with the quiet ceremony of someone setting down a thing they have carried for 2 years. Miss Alcott came at 10 exactly. She came without her companion. She sat beside Judge Aldrin, and she did not look at Mira, but Mira looked at her and read in the set of her hands, folded, tight, aware, that she had spent the night in some version of the same accounting Mira had spent 2 years in, and had arrived at something. Lord Hale came at 1:15, not knowing what he was coming to, having been told only that the Duke had requested all principal members of the household and estate in the drawing room, and he came beautiful and immaculate, as always, and saw the room as it was arranged and stood in the doorway with his weight changing slightly. The way a man's weight changes when he is choosing whether to advance or retreat. Mira watched him choose, and what he chose was the smile, and she thought, there it is. The Duke came last. He had come from outside. There was morning air on him, and his boots were the estate boots, the ones with grass on them, and he came in and looked at the room in a sweep and sat without being asked, without ceremony, in the chair nearest the door, which put him, Mira noted, between Lord Hale and the exit. "Thank you," she said to the room, and no one in particular. "I'll be brief." She opened the documents. She walked to the window where the light was best, because what she was about to do required good light, and she laid the first ledger open on the table at the window. "This is the Eastern Tenancy Receiving Ledger, Michaelmas Quarter, the year before I arrived. The figures here," she indicated the column, "represent rents collected from the tenant farmers on the east parcels. The figure on the summary page is this one." She held the page up, angled to the light so that the ink was visible from across the room. She read the number aloud, the figure on the estate account for the same quarter. She opened the second document, is this one. She read it aloud. The difference was £340. Lord Hale said, "An accounting discrepancy of that kind is common. Pruitt can tell you, timings, adjustments, Mr. Pruitt has certified both figures," Mira said. "Haven't you?" "Both under oath, if required," said Pruitt from the window. This was not a single quarter. She moved down the table to the next page. Over 18 months the aggregate is, and she read the number. "This is the amount by which the estate accounts under reported the tenancy receipts. The money went somewhere. I have traced where, with one exception I will come to." Lord Hale was still smiling. "Mira," he said, with the tone of a man explaining something to a person who means well. "Estate accounting has complexities. What you found may be quite innocently. These orders," she opened the apothecary documents, "are made on estate account, in the Duke's name, for compound medicines delivered over 18 months to the master suite. The delivery notes are signed by Lord Hale. The patient notation on each order is coded. But the code is not difficult. It is the room number of the suite, and the suite at that time was occupied by the first Duchess." She paused. "I am not a physician. I am not in a position to characterize the compounds. I am in a position to present the documents and their chronology to Judge Aldrin and allow him to determine whether a physician's testimony is required." The smile left Lord Hale's face. It did not go quickly. It went the way light goes at the end of a day, gradually, and then all at once. "The exception I mentioned," she said, "there is one quarter for which I cannot account for the missing funds by any document I have found. However, I have a question for Mr. Farish." She looked at the clerk, Lord Hale's clerk, a young man who had been stationed near the back wall and who was now looking at the floor. "Mr. Farish, the quarterly account summaries that were sent to the Duke in the city for his signature in the months when the Duke was absent, were they prepared by Lord Hale, or were they prepared by you?" Mr. Farish said nothing. She said, "Mr. Farish, the Duke is in this room. I am asking one question. Were the summaries prepared by Lord Hale?" A long silence, the kind of silence a room makes when it is listening. "He told me," said Mr. Farish, very quietly, "that the figures had been corrected, that there had been errors and he was correcting them. His voice was that of a young man who has been carrying something too heavy. He said the Duke had approved the method. Did he show you the Duke's approval? He said it was verbal." A pause. I wrote the summary totals. I set the figures he gave me. I didn't know what they were from." "Thank you," she said. She did not look at Lord Hale. She looked at Judge Aldrin. "There is one more thing." She reached to the table and picked up the last document, the one she had handled most carefully, the one she had carried in the inside pocket of her dress since Friday, because it was the one she would not risk being wrong about. It was a letter, folded once. The handwriting was Lord Hale's. The date was 3 days before the first Duchess died. She held it to the light and read it aloud, every word, in the same even voice she used for household accounts. When she finished, the room was very quiet. Miss Alcott's hands, Mira saw, were no longer folded. She had her arms around herself, the way a person holds themselves when the last confirmation of something they feared has arrived and is precisely as bad as expected. Her face was white and perfectly composed, the composure of someone who will weep later, privately, for a long time. Lord Hale looked at the letter in Mira's hands, and then at the table of documents, and then at the judge. And something in his face did what Mira had read a long time coming. It fell away from beautiful. What was underneath it was smaller and older and genuinely sorrowful, and she let herself look at it only briefly, because what she saw there was not guilt performing grief, but grief itself, the original thing that had curdled over years into its present form. And she thought, there was something he loved once that did not love him back, and this is what he did with it. She did not say this. She would not say it. She looked at Judge Aldrin. I believe that is sufficient for your purposes. The questions of law are yours. The judge had not moved through any of it. He looked at Lord Hale for a long moment. Lord Hale, he said, I would recommend, very strongly, that you say nothing further in this room. Lord Hale said nothing further in that room. It was the Duke who spoke next, and what he said was addressed not to Lord Hale but to Mira Caspian. His voice was, she had no word for it, level. Weighted in a way that meant a great deal was being held inside the level. He has been living on the estate. We will arrange, there will be an income settled on him, sufficient to maintain, somewhere else, said Judge Aldrin. Somewhere else, the Duke agreed. He did not look at his cousin. He kept his eyes on the documents, his hands quiet on his knees. He was doing, she thought, what he always did, holding the thing still by being still himself, because he had learned somewhere that if he held still enough, everything else might hold too. There will be no public proceeding, no scandal attached to the name. What has been, the settlements of the duchy will require review. All of them. He looked at Pruitt. Will you work with her grace? As I have been doing, said Pruitt, and if his voice was slightly unsteady, it was steady enough. Lord Hale was escorted by his own clerk and the judge's clerk from the room. He did not speak. At the door he turned for a moment, not toward the Duke, not toward Mira, but toward Miss Alcott, and there was something in his face that was not apology exactly, but was adjacent to it, and was the most honest thing Mira had ever seen in it. Miss Alcott looked back at him with gray eyes that were steady as water, and said nothing, and he went. Judge Aldrin stayed to take a full written account from both Pruitt and Mira. Miss Alcott gave a brief statement about what she had and had not been told of the arrangements that had brought her to Arunholm. The young clerk wrote. The morning moved. The July light moved across the floor in the slow way July light does, as if it had nowhere to be. When the judge left, he paused at the door and said, to no one in particular, the way out, in these matters, is always through the middle. In the light. Before witnesses, he looked at Mira with approval so dry. It was barely visible. You understood that. Someone taught me, she said, which was not quite true. She had taught herself, the hard way, in a house where creditors stood in the hall, but was true enough. Pruitt stayed to collect the documents. Miss Alcott stayed because she was still. The Duke did not leave. He sat in the chair nearest the door for a long time after the others were gone, and Mira sat across from him. And neither of them said anything, and it was not the silence of people with nothing to say. At last he said, I owe you something that cannot be repaid. You don't, she said. It's the house's money. I kept the house's accounts. That's not what I meant. He looked at her. I came back from abroad after Charlotte died, and Caspian told me things. About how you managed, that you wanted the arrangement kept formal. That you didn't wish, that you had said. He stopped. He looked at his hands. They were a working man's hands, which she had always noticed, had always found slightly incongruous and slightly right. I believed him. I should not have believed him, without asking you. She thought of February, when she had first begun to understand. She thought of how she had spent the months since building the demonstration with great care, and part of the care, she could be honest about this now, had been the difficulty of knowing that whatever she found would have to travel through her and through the documents and through witnesses and out the other side, without ever having the comfort of being simply a thing she knew, without ever having been believed on her own account. "You're right that you should have asked me," she said. "You didn't." She let that sit for a moment, with its full weight. I am choosing not to hold it at the same value as everything else that has happened. He was quiet. Something in his face, in the stillness that was his habitual language, shifted. She could not name what it shifted toward, precisely, but it was in the direction of something she had not seen in it before, something that was not grief or duty, or the composure that armors grief and duty, something that was simply, carefully, present, Miss Elcott, he said. She came without full knowledge of what she was being placed in, Mira said. That's clear. She came because Caspian told her I had requested her. He said it with the precision of a man who has spent the morning assembling a picture from its pieces and is not yet certain he has them all right. I had not. I was told she had heard I was, that she wished to reconnect. The letter that came was in. He stopped. In your hand, he said, or near enough to it. The November correspondence. The letters from her writing room, Lord Hale's months of careful management. He arranged it on both sides, she said. Yes, he looked at her. And I came back to a house with a guest installed, and a wife moved to the upper corridor, and documents drawn up for my signature that I had not. He made a small controlled motion, with one hand, that was, she thought, the closest she had ever seen him come to a gesture of futility. I signed the household documents he gave me. I am sorry. Mira. He used her name the way he had used it in the corridor the night before, plainly, as if he had decided it was permitted. I do not know how to say what I want to say without it sounding like a thing I have arrived at for the wrong reasons, because the stakes are now what they are. She looked at him steadily. She thought about the word transactional. She thought about everything that had been done in the name of arrangements and practicalities. She thought about 3 years of feeding costs and tenancy figures, and the way a person disappears into competence, because competence is the form of presence that no one challenges. Then, say what you want to say, she said. And I will tell you which reason I think it comes from. He looked at her for a moment longer. He closed his hands around each other, and then he said, quietly, in the voice that never needed raising, I brought you here because I knew what you were. I had your father's letters. You won't have known he wrote to me. It was the year before he died, and he asked me. He said there was no money, but there was a daughter who would not survive an ordinary arrangement, who needed a house large enough for the size of what she could do. He said, give her something to run. He said she will surprise you. He paused. He was describing you from the outside. He couldn't have known. He didn't know what it would be. A longer pause. What I did not say to you, which I should have said at the beginning, before Caspian had 3 years to build a wall of correspondence between us, is that I intended this to be a real thing, if you were willing. Not a practical arrangement, a real one. He met her eyes. That is what I want to say. I understand if the timing makes it impossible to believe. She sat with that for a long moment. She thought of her father, who had loved her more than he had been able to say while alive, and had apparently, characteristically, found a way to say it at the very last. She thought of the green felt in the drawer compartment that she had lined herself. She thought of a letter read aloud in the light before witnesses. She thought of the red kite and the sweet peas, and the morning she had decided she would miss this place if she had to leave. She said, slowly, give her something to run. Those were his words. He also said, she will surprise you. He was, said Edvard, entirely correct. She looked at him. His face was still without its armor. She thought, it is possible to spend 3 years reading a person through walls and silences and intermediaries and still not have read them at all. She thought, I have been very alone in this house, and so has he, and we have been made alone on purpose. I am going to need some time, she said, to set aside my irritation at the lost 3 years. Take what you need, he said. I am not going anywhere. And then, more quietly, that was a very poor joke. No, she said. It was a reasonable one. And then, because she had been counting, and could not help herself, your 5th joke in 3 years. He blinked. You counted. I count things, she said. It is my nature. She looked at him. Ask me again, she said, when I have finished being angry. I expect it will take less time than either of us might think. He married her in November, in the Ehrenholm chapel, with only the household present, and Pruitt wept in the doorway with the controlled devastation of a man who has maintained dignity for 2 years and cannot be expected to maintain it forever. Miss Alcott had departed in August with Mira's genuine goodwill and a letter of introduction to a family in the north of Mira's own drafting. She wrote at Christmas time to say she had found the situation agreeable and that she had thought of Ehrenholm and hoped things were well. Mira wrote back that they were, and meant it. Mr. Farish was kept on at Mira's recommendation, having been an instrument rather than an architect, and proved over subsequent years to be exactly what Pruitt had always suspected he might be if properly directed, meticulous, honest, and gratifyingly easy to correct. Lord Hale took the settlement and went abroad. Mira had thought about him precisely once after he left, in the way one thinks about a sum that has been balanced and closed, with relief at the closed page, and something that was almost, without excusing the figure, a comprehension of the arithmetic that had made him what he was. She did not wish him ill. She did not particularly wish him anything, which was its own kind of mercy. Judge Aldrin came to dinner in the spring and told a story about a misaccounted fishing rights dispute that was, in its way, almost as interesting as the Eastern Tenancy Ledger, and Pruitt, who had been invited on Mira's insistence and sat at the far end of the table with the contained satisfaction of a man who has lived to see a thing through, laughed so hard he knocked his wineglass, which Mira caught. The red kite, or its successor, she never established definitively whether it was one bird or several, was in the south field when she came down in July of the following year, on a morning very like the morning of the seal, the same long angle of light and the same sweet peas. She stood in the kitchen garden with Edvard beside her. He had come down early, which was new. She had made an early riser of him in some ways she was privately pleased about, and the dog leaned against her knee with his usual certainty, and the bird tilted on the heat above the field. You are thinking something, he said. He had learned, over the year, to say this rather than to guess, because she had told him, with some specificity, that guessing what she was thinking was a habit she found endearing in its optimism and usually incorrect in its conclusions. I am thinking, she said, that last year at this time I was standing in this garden expecting to lose it. He looked at the field. He had his hands in his pockets, which she had discovered was his most comfortable posture, and therefore the one that meant he was easiest to read. And now, she said. I am standing in this garden thinking it belongs to me in a way it didn't then. Not legally. I don't mean legally. I know what you mean. He looked down at her. Your father said something else in his letters. I didn't tell you all of them. She looked up at him. No, he said, if she decides to stay, she will have decided, because it is worth her while, and she will keep it as things that are worth people's while are always kept, better than it was when she found it. He looked at the kite. I thought you should know that he was not wrong. She looked at the field, at the bird, at the light coming over the wall in its long July angle that made gold things of the beanpoles. She thought of a seal in an empty drawer, and a ledger with honest numbers, and a letter read aloud in good light, and of the specific arithmetic by which everything lost is accounted for and the balance comes out. Against all expectation. Not merely solvent, but rich. He was not wrong, she said. About most things. The dog leaned harder into her knee, as though reminding her he was still there and had been patient quite long enough, and she put her hand on his head, and the kite made its tilt and wheel above the field, and the summer pressed in warm and bright from every direction at once. If this story kept you in its warmth a little longer than the evening called for, if something in Mira's steady hands, or in a ledger brought out of hiding after 2 long years of waiting, or in the particular grace of a happiness that knows what it cost, then you are exactly the company we keep here by this fire. There is always a chair set out, always a kettle on. Always another story laid ready for when the night turns long. Come back to us, we save the place beside the hearth, for listeners who notice the small things, the ink stain that never quite cleans, the dog who leans with perfect certainty. And if you are moved to settle in for good, the subscribe is just one small latch on the gate. Tell us in the comments, what was the moment, the ledger, the letter, the first real joke, the morning in the garden, when you knew? Sleep well tonight, and be honest with the ones who have kept your accounts clean.